focus on some important principles and values that we felt had to be developed as a way of describing our commitment and intentions for community development. In other words, at the first meeting, when we locked horns, we said, hey, let's back off and figure out what our principles for engagement are. How should we be working together? Because until we could find that common ground, moving forward was just going to be really difficult. We created policy priorities for Detroit neighborhoods, and I'll present them now. And then Tom Gadaris of Detroit Future City will present the principles of neighborhood city engagement. So, let's look at these slides. Let's see if I can read sideways. The stakeholders of Building Vision are committed to generating a policy environment that facilitates effective community development in Detroit. Towards that end, we issue a call to action to improve existing policy and create new policy at the city and state level aimed at long-term affordability strategies for Detroit neighborhoods. We cannot overemphasize the importance of us going to the state and demanding certain things for our cities, understanding that so many policies are controlled at the state and at the city level. And it would be really beautiful to have those of us in the city of Detroit working together to go to Lansing and make demands on our shared behalf. Next slide. Let's see. In the formation of a comprehensive affordability plan that meets the needs of Detroiters of all income levels in every Detroit neighborhood, and the bottom is not really 30% of the AMI, the bottom of the affordability level is homeless, really, and then you work your way up. That affordability resource must include housing for families with less than 50% of area median income. And again, not just 50, but below 50. We need mechanisms to assure permanent affordability of housing. We need to make sure that affordable housing must accommodate families. Building a studio apartment in an apartment complex and saying, this is my affordability plan means that only certain types of Detroiters are being rehoused in these new developments. We need to think broader than that. Repair and rehab strategies must be prioritized. Those of us who work in neighborhoods know that when you talk to a lot of residents, they're not saying, even talking about new housing, they're talking about fixing the housing they're in and the blighted housing next to them. And one more thing, and I think this is equally important, demolition is not the first choice of anybody. Okay? I was looking at a neighborhood plan, and we spent $1 million in one neighborhood in a couple of years in demolitions. Just imagine if we had invested that money in home improvement.
Yes.
I'm sorry. From what I'm sorry. City, county, and state policy and practices must be aimed at eliminating housing loss from property tax foreclosure. Okay. And new state policy should be created to generate an ongoing flow of resources into Detroit neighborhoods. State policy into neighborhoods. Okay. Now I'm done, and I'm going to hand off to Tom, who will lead us through the principles of engagement that got us to these very ambitious policy priorities.
Donna. And I do want to recognize Donna and Mike Rafferty, who were the co-chairs of this committee, and did a great job. As was mentioned, there were a number of difficult conversations, and I do really think, I do appreciate the participation of folks who are representing city agencies, departments, and quasi-governmental agencies, because as Donna said, there were some difficult conversations, and I think they were probably more uncomfortable for some of them than it was for the rest of us. So, the statement of principles is included in your handouts. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'll try to summarize it a little bit. It starts with a vision statement, and I will read the vision statement because that's really what the rest of the principles rest on. So the vision underlying these principles are that community engagement begins with neighborhood priorities mutually developed between city government and neighborhoods. That all neighborhoods have stakeholder-driven organizations, block clubs, business groups, CDOs, articulating and advocating the priorities and interests of both the people and places of the neighborhood, that stakeholder-driven, neighborhood-based organizations and city government are constructive partners, now I'm looking at Don, in planning and decision-making for overall direction, projects, quality of life, and investment in the neighborhoods. Both see each other as equal partners and respect each other's role and perspective. That there is a current master plan of policies in effect that advances sustainable and equitable development in the city as a whole, and that community engagement strategies conducted by various city departments and city offices are standardized and based on best practices. So that's the vision that drove the principles. I think it's important that we recognize that for these principles to have meaning, it really depends on the goodwill and the mutual respect of all the parties, and that there's no enforcer of these rules other than the participants themselves. So the guiding principles, and I won't read these in their entirety, they are in here, but just to summarize, that neighborhoods have representation from accountable resident-driven organizations, that when multiple departments within the city are involved in engagement practices within neighborhoods, that they're carried out in partnership with neighborhood-based organizations, that there is a master plan, that is updated in accordance with the charter, and is a document that's available for all to see and use, that there needs to be transparent decision-making, that government decision-making processes that affect neighborhoods, that people within the communities understand how those decisions are made and how they can engage in the processes. The role of the city should be clear to everyone, as well as the role of the community development organization, that both entities need to be accountable to the people that they represent, that the work that we do together is based on principles of equity and inclusion, as we've already talked a little bit about this morning, that when new policies are developed by the city that affect neighborhoods, that these are not developed and just presented as a fait accompli, but they're developed in partnership and openly in soliciting the feedback of residents and other stakeholders. And then when planning is happening in specific neighborhoods, that planning takes place in a way that respects and involves the community represented organizations and neighborhood-based accountable organizations. So that's the principles. I'm not sure who's next. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. So I would like to now bring up Raul Echevarria, who's going to present the statement for the Leadership Pipeline Task Force. And just to remind everyone again, that statement is in your packet, so if you want to kind of follow along, that's great.